For 15 years, the African savanna has been my office, my home. My name is Dr. Ananya Sharma, and as a wildlife biologist, I've lived my life by one unwavering code: observe, but never interfere. It's the first rule of our work, a sacred pact we make with the wild. You let nature run its course, no matter how brutal, no matter how heartbreaking. I had seen life and death play out in 1,000 different ways, and never once had I broken that rule. Until that day, the air was thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth. A vicious storm had torn through the reserve the night before, and the Mara River, usually a calm, meandering ribbon of life, had transformed into a raging, muddy monster. I was on my usual patrol, my jeep splashing through deep puddles, when I saw it. Just a flicker of tan against the churning brown water. I stopped the engine, the sudden silence deafening. I raised my binoculars, my hands steady from years of practice. And my heart, it just stopped. It was a lion cub, so small it couldn't have been more than a few months old. It was being tossed and turned by the current, its tiny head barely above the water, letting out weak, terrified cries that were almost swallowed by the river's roar. Every part of my training, every page of every textbook I had ever read screamed at me, let it go. This is nature. The weak perish, the strong survive. It's a tragedy, but it's a natural one. To interfere is to break the law of this land. But then I saw its eyes, wide with terror. It wasn't a statistic. It wasn't a data point in my research. It was a life begging for a chance. And in that single heart-stopping moment, 15 years of training, of discipline, of professional detachment meant nothing. I was going in. I didn't think. I just acted. My camera bag was thrown onto the passenger seat, the jeep door slammed shut, and I was running towards the riverbank. The ground was slick with mud, trying to pull me down, but my eyes were locked on that small, struggling body. The moment my boots hit the water, the true power of the flood hit me. It was a physical force, a liquid wall that slammed into my chest, stealing my breath. The water was colder than I could have imagined, and the current was a vicious, invisible hand, pulling me downstream. Debris, branches, logs, who knows what else, rushed past me. For a second, a primal fear gripped me. This was suicide, but then I heard it again. A tiny, desperate squeal. It cut through my fear. I pushed forward, my legs burning, my arms pumping, fighting for every single inch. The river fought back, but the image of those terrified eyes burned in my mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my fingers brushed against its wet fur. I grabbed hold, pulling the shivering, exhausted cub into my arms. It was so light, a fragile little thing, all bones and panicked energy. It immediately clung to me, its tiny claws digging into my jacket, not with aggression, but with pure, desperate instinct to hold on. I could feel its tiny heart hammering against my own chest, a frantic rhythm of life. The journey back was even harder. I was carrying a precious weight now, trying to shield it from the current while fighting for my own footing. My lungs burned. My muscles screamed. But finally, I felt the soft mud of the riverbank beneath my feet. I had made it. I stumbled out of the water, gasping for air, and gently placed the shivering cub on the ground. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own ragged breath and the roar of the river behind me. A wave of relief washed over me. I did it. I actually did it, and that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground, right into my bones. It wasn't from the river. It was from behind me. Slowly, so slowly, I looked up. My blood turned to ice. From the shadows of the acacia trees they emerged. Not one, not two. A dozen pairs of amber eyes, all fixed on me. Lionesses, powerful, muscular, and a massive male, his dark mane making him look like a king from a nightmare. The entire pride, and I was standing between them and their child. I was trapped. My life didn't flash before my eyes. There was no time. There was only the crushing, absolute certainty of death. Every muscle in my body locked up. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The air grew heavy, thick with a tension so profound it felt like a physical weight. The world narrowed to this single terrifying scene. a circle of Africa's most perfect predators, and me, the foolish human who had dared to touch their young. My mind was a blank slate of terror. There were no options, no escape, but then something happened that defied every law of nature I had ever known. The largest lioness, clearly the matriarch, her face scarred with the wisdom of countless hunts, took a slow, deliberate step forward. I braced for the attack, for the lunge that would end it all, but it never came. She didn't even look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the small, wet cub I had just placed on the ground. She walked right past me, as if I were nothing more than a rock or a tree, and began to gently nuzzle her child. She licked its fur, her rough tongue cleaning away the river's mud, her deep rumbling purrs a sound of profound relief. Time seemed to stop. The other lions remained perfectly still, watching their queen. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she finished tending to her cub. And then she turned her head. Her amber eyes met mine. There was no anger, no threat, just a deep ancient intelligence that seemed to look right through me, into my very soul. And then she did it. She slowly, very slowly, closed her eyes and then opened them again, a slow blink. Was I imagining it? In the world of felines, a slow blink isn't a sign of aggression. It's a sign of trust. It's an acknowledgement, a gesture that says, I see you, and I am not a threat. A quiet chuffing sound escaped her throat, soft and low. And then she simply lay down, her massive body collapsing onto the grass with a quiet sigh. As if on a silent command, the rest of the pride followed her lead. One by one they settled down, their bodies relaxed, their gazes no longer threatening, but watchful. They weren't attacking. They weren't surrounding me. They were letting me go. In that moment, surrounded by a dozen lions, I wasn't prey. I was a witness to a miracle. A silent thank you, spoken in a language older than words. I didn't dare turn my back. I started moving backward, one slow, trembling step at a time. My eyes never left the matriarch. She just watched me, her head resting on her paws, a silent, powerful guardian. When I finally reached the cold metal of my jeep, I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I fell inside, slammed the door, and only then did the air rush back into my lungs in a ragged, desperate gasp. My colleague David was in the passenger seat, pale as a ghost. The binoculars were still pressed to his eyes. He slowly lowered them, his expression a mixture of terror and pure astonishment. Ananya, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Did that just happen? He pointed to the small action camera mounted on the dashboard. The red light was blinking. It had recorded everything. We sat there for a long time, the engine off, just watching the footage on the camera's small screen. We saw the rescue, the terrifying arrival of the pride, and then the unbelievable moment, the slow blink, the way the matriarch simply lay down. It was all there, undeniable. It wasn't magic, David, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. My scientific mind, which had been frozen in terror, was starting to thaw, desperately trying to make sense of the impossible. It was a relationship. 5 years in the making, I explained. This wasn't just any pride. This was the Mara Queens, the very pride I had been studying for the last 5 years. The matriarch, I called her Shuja, the brave one. She knew me. She knew the sound of my Jeep's engine. She knew my scent. For 5 years I'd been a constant, non-threatening presence in their lives. I had watched them from a distance, documenting their births, their hunts, their struggles. I had never interfered, never threatened them. Over thousands of hours, an invisible thread of trust had been woven. That day, when I broke my cardinal rule, I put that trust to the ultimate test. Shuja didn't see a human poacher stealing her cub. She saw a familiar, neutral presence performing an act of help. The slow blink wasn't a thank you in human terms. It was a communication. I recognize you. I understand. You are not a threat to my family. It was the logical explanation for a moment that felt utterly magical. The footage wasn't just a crazy video. It was proof. Proof of a cognitive and emotional depth in these animals that we were only just beginning to understand. That footage changed everything. It went far beyond a viral clip. It became a cornerstone of my research, published in scientific journals and analyzed by behaviorists around the world. It sparked a global conversation, not just about lion behavior, but about animal consciousness itself. We established a foundation, funded by the overwhelming response, to further study the intricate social bonds of these magnificent creatures. But for me, the true legacy of that day was far more personal. Years passed. I returned to that same spot by the Mara River many times. One afternoon I saw them in the distance, the Mara queens resting in the shade. They were older, the pride larger, and among them was a magnificent male lion, his mane just beginning to darken, his body powerful and sleek. It was him. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the savannah, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met mine across the vast expanse. There was no grand gesture, no movie moment, just a flicker of something, a quiet shared memory across the gulf that separates our species. Then he turned his head and nuzzled his mother, Shuja, before settling back into the heart of his family. I had started that day as a biologist, a woman of rules and logic who believed in a firm line between human and animal. I ended it as something else entirely. I had learned that compassion is a universal language, understood in the silent blink of an eye, in the courage to break a rule for the sake of a single precious life. We call them wild beasts. We see them as savage, driven only by instinct, but perhaps, in the quiet chambers of their hearts, they hold a capacity for gratitude, for recognition, for trust, that we are only just beginning to appreciate. That day, the savannah taught me its most profound lesson. Sometimes the greatest, most important rule is the one written not in a textbook but on the heart.